Emotional hijacking. Emotional hijacking is when your brain checks out and your emotions take the wheel, driving you straight into dumb decisions. It starts with the amygdala, a little part of your brain built for survival. This guy is like the panicky neighbor who calls the cops for a raccoon in the yard. It's wired to react to danger, real or imagined, before you can even think. The problem? It doesn't care about logic. When it senses a threat, or something that it thinks is a threat, it flips out, flooding your body with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. Your rational brain, the prefrontal cortex, gets shoved into the back seat, while the amygdala throws a tantrum. This hijacking happens fast. Let's say someone cuts you off in traffic. Instead of thinking, wow, what a jerk, your brain decides you're in a death race. Your heart starts pounding, your muscles tense up, and you're flipping them off before you even realize it. That's emotional hijacking. It's the same process whether you're scared, angry, or even madly in love. Humans fall for this trap because we're wired to prioritize survival over everything else. Back in caveman days, if you saw a lion, you didn't stop to think about its intentions. You ran, climbed a tree, or threw a rock. Quick reactions saved lives. But now, your brain uses the same system for things that aren't life-threatening, like a rude email or a breakup. Instead of taking a breath and thinking it through, you act on impulse, making everything worse. Fear is one of the biggest triggers for emotional hijacking. When you're scared, your brain freaks out and assumes the worst. You might avoid opportunities because they feel risky, even when they're not. Love isn't any better. When you're head over heels, your brain pumps out dopamine and oxytocin, making you blind to red flags. You'll justify anything to keep those feel-good chemicals flowing, even if it means ignoring common sense. Anger, though, might be the dumbest of all. It makes you lash out, burn bridges, and do things you'll regret later, all because your amygdala can't handle a little disrespect. Sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is a brain glitch where people keep throwing good money, time, or effort after bad, all because they already invested something. It's like our brains turn into stubborn toddlers, refusing to admit they messed up. The whole thing starts with how humans are wired. We hate wasting stuff. Money, effort, dignity, you name it. So when we've sunk any of that into a choice, no matter how bad it's turning out, we cling to it like it's a winning lottery ticket. Here's how it happens. You start with a decision. Let's say you buy a concert ticket. You're excited at first, but then the weather forecast predicts a monsoon, and you realize the band sucks. A rational person, or one who values their time and safety over soggy regret, would stay home. But nope, not you. You march out with an umbrella and a bad attitude, because hey, you already paid for the ticket. Never mind that you're doubling down on misery. That's the sunk cost fallacy. Your investment blinds you to the fact that quitting would actually be the smarter move. This mess happens because of a couple of psychological quirks. One is called loss aversion. Humans are allergic to loss. We'd rather cling to garbage than admit we wasted something. The other is a side dish of cognitive dissonance. You tell yourself, I'm not an idiot. I wouldn't waste my money on this. So you try to fix the decision by committing even harder. Smart move, Einstein, but don't think it's just about concert tickets. Rational people lose their minds in way bigger ways. Businesses do it all the time. They'll pump millions into failing projects because they've already spent millions on them. A company starts some grand new initiative. It sucks. Everyone knows it sucks, but instead of pulling the plug, they double the budget. Why? Because they can't admit it was a terrible idea to start with. Heaven forbid the shareholders figure out they hired a bunch of clowns. The sunk cost fallacy has roots in evolution. Back in the day, when survival meant sticking with decisions, it made sense to commit to something and see it through. If you started building a shelter, you didn't abandon it halfway. You finished, or you froze to death. But the modern world doesn't work like that. Now we're clinging to bad jobs, dumb hobbies, and broken tech like our ancestors clung to their spear-making skills. Progress, right? You'd think rational people would know better, but that's the joke. Rationality doesn't mean squat when emotions and pride are involved. Our egos jump in and say, nope, keep going. You're not wrong. Just keep wasting time, money, and your last shred of sanity. And the higher the stakes, the harder we dig in. A $10 mistake? Meh. A $10,000 mistake? Oh, now you're defending it like it's your firstborn child. Social proof. Social proof is the brain's lazy way of saying, everyone else is doing it, so I guess I should too. It's a psychological shortcut that turns rational people into sheep. Humans are pack animals, and this nonsense has been baked into our DNA since cavemen days. Back then, sticking with the group kept you alive. If the whole tribe started running, you didn't stop to ask why. You ran, or you became a saber-toothed tiger lunch. Fast forward a few thousand years, and the same wiring is making people line up for overpriced sneakers or like pointless social media trends. Progress. This mental trap happens because humans are terrified of standing out. People want to fit in so badly they'll follow the crowd right off a cliff, sometimes literally. It works like this. You see a bunch of people doing something, like buying a product, attending an event, or endorsing a dumb opinion. Instead of stopping to think, is this actually a good idea? Your brain goes, well, if everyone else thinks it's smart, it must be. It gets worse when the crowd looks like they know what they're doing. If the people you're watching seem confident, your brain cranks up the trust dial, even if they're just as clueless as you. This is why influencers exist. They slap on fake confidence and a big smile, and suddenly, they're convincing people to buy products they wouldn't use to clean their toilet. Rational thought doesn't stand a chance when your brain sees 1,000 likes on a post and goes, wow, this person must be a genius. Social proof can also steamroll rational people in groups. Herd mentality is the sad reality of how humans behave in crowds. One person shouts something stupid, and the whole group jumps on board without asking questions. Riots? That's social proof in action. Nobody in a mob stops to think, hey, maybe burning this car isn't the best idea. They just see other people doing it, and monkey see monkey do. Businesses and marketers love exploiting this flaw. They slap bestseller on a product, and suddenly everyone wants it. Never mind if it's overpriced junk. The label alone is enough to make rational shoppers lose their minds. Reviews are another goldmine for social proof. If a product has thousands of 5-star ratings, people trust it without digging deeper. Never mind that half those reviews are probably fake or paid for. People see the crowd and assume it must be legit. Golden child syndrome. This is what happens when parents decide one kid is their personal success trophy and then shove them onto a pedestal so high they can't breathe. It starts with a simple setup. Parents pick a favorite. Maybe the kid shows promise early on, like solving puzzles faster than their siblings or not setting the house on fire. Suddenly, this kid becomes the family's golden ticket. Parents pour all their hopes, dreams, and weird, unfulfilled fantasies into this one child, acting like the other kids are just backup singers in the family band. That kind of favoritism messes a kid up. The pressure hits right away. Golden children learn that their worth is tied to performance. Not just good performance, though. Flawless performance. Winning isn't enough. They have to crush it every single time. They ace the spelling bee? Great. But you have to be 100 points better than the other kids. Then now they have to win the regional championship. Bring home an A? Why isn't it an A+? Nothing is ever enough because the parents treat success like a moving goalpost. This constant grind forces the kid into a perfectionist mindset. Golden children know that failure means disappointment. Disappointing the people who worship you feels like a public execution, so they obsess over every detail. They study harder, work longer, and second-guess themselves to the point of exhaustion. But they're not doing it for themselves. They're doing it to keep their golden child status. That shiny pedestal isn't a reward. The origin of this mess is pretty obvious. Parents with golden child syndrome are usually projecting. Maybe they wanted to be athletes, scholars, or artists, but flopped somewhere along the way. So, instead of dealing with their own regrets like adults, they dump their unfinished dreams onto their kid. The golden child becomes a stand-in for the life their parents wish they'd had. No pressure, right? Except, oh wait, all the pressure. The kind that eats away at a kid's self-esteem until they're nothing but a walking ball of anxiety. Rational people fall for this trap because it looks like a compliment. Being the favorite sounds great on paper. Who doesn't want to be special? But in reality, it's a double-edged sword with the dull end aimed right at the kid. If they stumble, even a little, the whole family dynamic feels like it might collapse. Rational thinking goes out the window when you're constantly trying to avoid being a disappointment. Some golden children crack under the weight of the expectations and rebel. They quit trying, screw up on purpose, or go completely off the rails. Others burn out so hard they can't function. They hit adulthood feeling like a used-up tool, wondering why they're so unhappy. Either way, the parents who built this golden child nightmare usually act shocked when things fall apart, like they didn't spend years turning their kid into a stressed-out perfectionist robot. Martyr complex. Or as other people call it, I can fix them attitude. Martyr complex is when someone makes their life all about sacrificing for others. Not out of generosity, but because they want attention or pity. It starts with a person who thinks the world owes them validation for suffering. They throw their own needs into the trash and act like that's some kind of moral high ground. But it's not selfless. They're basically saying, look how much I'm suffering for you. Worship me for it. This nonsense often begins with how people are raised. Some grow up in families where being the good one means doing everything for everyone else. Maybe they're taught that self-care is selfish, or that their worth is tied to how much they give up. Over time, this warps into a mindset where they believe their sacrifices make them better than others. It's not about helping anymore. It's about being the hero who suffers the most. They treat their misery like it's a badge of honor. Martyrs create their own hell. They overcommit to things they can't handle, take on everyone else's problems, and then act like the world owes them for their hard work. Rational thinking doesn't survive in this mess. Instead of asking, is this even worth it? They double down on their sacrifices. They ignore their own needs to the point of burnout. all while expecting applause for it. The root of this is validation. Martyrs crave being seen as indispensable. They want people to look at them and say, "Wow, what would we do without you?" But it's a trap they set for themselves. The more they sacrifice, the more they expect recognition. And when they don't get it, they spiral into self-pity. They love playing the victim card, acting like everyone else is ungrateful while they're out here breaking their backs for the greater good. Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect was first identified by two researchers, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, in the late 1990s. They noticed that incompetent people tend to overestimate their abilities, while skilled people underestimate theirs. The Dunning-Kruger effect is when people with the least knowledge think they know the most. It's not just being wrong, it's being wrong with confidence. This starts when someone barely learns about a topic and instantly thinks they're an expert. They don't have enough knowledge to realize how clueless they actually are. Instead, they charge ahead, acting like their half-assed understanding is the final word. This happens because of how the human brain works. When you first learn something new, it feels exciting. You understand a tiny bit, and your brain thinks, "Wow, I'm a genius." But knowledge is tricky. The more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. That first burst of confidence is a lie. It's your brain fooling itself into thinking it's smarter than it is. The real experts, the ones who actually know their stuff, are usually less confident. They understand how complicated things are, so they're careful with their opinions. Meanwhile, the loudmouth who read one Wikipedia page thinks they're ready to lecture everyone. Rational people fall for this because confidence is convincing. If someone speaks like they know what they're talking about, others tend to believe them. People don't stop to check if the person is actually qualified. It's easier to just nod along than to question them. That's how you end up with clueless people leading the charge in everything from boardroom meetings to social media arguments. They're loud, they're wrong, and somehow they're in charge. This mindset starts small. Someone learns a basic fact and immediately thinks they've unlocked the secrets of the universe. They skip the part where they should dig deeper and verify their information. Instead, they dive straight into giving advice or making decisions. And this is the part where it makes it dangerous. Overconfidence leads to bad choices. Bad choices lead to disasters. The worst part is, they don't even realize they're the problem. This effect shows up everywhere. In workplaces, you've got the guy who thinks he should be running the place even though he screws up basic tasks. In politics, it's the loudmouth who thinks they can fix everything despite having zero experience. On the internet, it's every keyboard warrior who argues about topics they clearly don't understand. These people aren't trying to be annoying, they genuinely think they're right. That's what makes it so frustrating. Bystander effect. The bystander effect is when a person sees a problem, shrugs, and assumes someone else will handle it. It's not laziness, it's human psychology playing a cruel joke. This starts when multiple people are around during an emergency or a situation that clearly needs attention. Instead of stepping up, everyone freezes. Their brains do a quick calculation and conclude, someone else will take care of it. Rationality takes the day off, and nothing gets done. This happens because of something called diffusion of responsibility. When more people are present, everyone assumes someone else is more qualified or willing to step in. If you're alone and see someone hurt, you'll probably help. But in a crowd, your brain says, "Welp, someone else will do it." It gets worse when there's ambiguity. If a situation isn't obviously life or death, people hesitate. Maybe they're unsure if help is even needed, or they don't want to risk looking stupid by overreacting, so they wait to see what others do. But the others are waiting too. This turns into a vicious cycle of inaction, with everyone standing around like confused mannequins. Fear of judgment also plays a big role. Nobody wants to be the idiot who oversteps or misreads the room. People care way too much about what strangers think, even in emergencies. Instead of acting, they freeze, hoping someone braver or dumber will make the first move. The origins of the bystander effect go way back to social conditioning. Humans evolved in groups, where stepping out of line could get you ostracized or worse. So we learned to blend in, follow cues from others, and avoid standing out. That worked great when survival depended on teamwork, but in modern society, it's a disaster. One famous case that highlighted this effect was the murder of Kitty Genovese in 1964. Reports claimed dozens of people heard her screams but did nothing to help. While later investigations showed the story was exaggerated, it still exposed how people freeze in groups. Religious zealotry. This happens when people take devotion to a belief system and crank it up to an obsessive level. It starts when someone decides their faith is not just true, but the only truth. They become so focused on their beliefs that they stop questioning anything about them. Critical thinking and logic tossed out the window. They replace curiosity with dogma and treat independent thought like a sin. The whole thing becomes less about spirituality and more about controlling how they see the world. This mindset usually begins with fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of punishment, or fear of the unknown. Religion provides answers to life's big, scary questions. What happens after death? Why do bad things happen? Zealots latch on to those answers and hold on for dear life. They cling to their beliefs so hard that any challenge feels like a personal attack. Instead of facing doubt, they double down. Their faith isn't just a part of their identity. It is their identity. They stop thinking critically because that might lead to questioning. Questioning could lead to admitting they're wrong. Can't have that. Rational people fall into this trap because religion often comes with a community. Being part of something bigger feels good, but in zealotry, the community demands total loyalty. Dissent isn't allowed. If someone questions the rules, they're out. This peer pressure keeps people in line, even when their gut tells them something's off. Zealots use this fear of rejection to enforce conformity. Zealotry thrives on an us versus them mentality. The group divides the world into two camps, the righteous and the damned. Anyone who disagrees is labeled as other. This black and white thinking makes it easy to ignore opposing views. Why bother listening when you've already decided they're wrong? Zealots see compromise and understanding as weaknesses. They'd rather alienate friends and family than admit someone else might have a point. Their devotion turns into arrogance, and their arrogance blinds them to reality. The origins of zealotry go way back. Religion has always been about control of people, also resources or power. Leaders figured out early on that extreme devotion makes people easier to manipulate. Convince them that questioning authority is a sin, and they'll do whatever you want. Over time, this control became self-sustaining. Zealots teach the next generation to obey without question. Phobia. Phobia domination happens when irrational fears hijack your brain, turning even the smartest person into a panicked mess. It starts with the brain misfiring over something harmless. A spider crawls across the floor, or a plane bumps through turbulence, and suddenly, your amygdala again goes nuts. It floods your body with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, and logic gets booted out the door. This begins early, often tied to a bad experience or something you've been taught to fear. Maybe you got stung by a bee once, or your overly dramatic aunt convinced you airplanes are flying coffins. That fear latches on and grows like mold. Over time, your brain starts associating that thing with danger, even if it's completely irrational. The worst part? You start avoiding it to feel safe. Avoidance might work short-term, but it makes the fear worse in the long run. Your brain thinks, oh, I dodged a bullet by staying away. Now the phobia owns you. Rational people get trapped in this because fear isn't about logic. It's about survival. Your brain thinks it's saving your life by overreacting to harmless stuff. The more you avoid what scares you, the less you challenge the fear. Instead of breaking free, you dig yourself deeper. The longer this cycle goes on, the more your brain convinces itself that the fear is justified. Phobia domination shows up in different ways. Some people freeze, unable to move or speak. Others bolt like their life depends on it. Then there are those who obsessively plan their lives around avoiding the fear. Afraid of elevators? Better climb 30 flights of stairs. Scared of flying? Road trip for 20 hours instead. It doesn't matter how ridiculous the workaround is. Your brain is happy as long as it doesn't have to face the fear. This mess is rooted in evolution. Back when humans lived in caves, overreacting to danger was useful. If you heard a rustle in the bushes, better to assume it's a predator and bolt than stick around to investigate. That instinct kept our ancestors alive. The problem is, modern life isn't full of predators. Well, maybe it still is, but it's not animals. You know what I mean. But your brain still operates like it is. Now you're panicking over public speaking or small spaces instead of lions and bears. Principle amnesia. You know the saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do? It's basically this. Amnesia of principles happens when people ditch their values to fit into a new crowd or keep a relationship afloat. It starts when someone steps into a situation that clashes with what they believe. Instead of standing their ground, they adapt. But not in the good way where you learn and grow. No, they start bending over backward to blend in. This usually begins with a desire to belong. Humans are social animals, desperate for connection and acceptance. Entering a new environment, like a job, a friend group, or a romantic relationship, puts pressure on them to match the vibe. If their principles don't line up, it's easier to shove those aside than risk being the odd one out. People tell themselves it's not a big deal, just a small compromise. But those small compromises add up fast. Rational people lose their reasoning here because they want to avoid conflict. They're scared that sticking to their values will make them stand out, or, worse, get rejected. So they start making excuses. It's just this once, or it's not that important. The problem is, once you cross that line, it's harder to go back. Amnesia of principles also thrives in group settings. Peer pressure isn't just for teenagers. Adults are just as bad, if not worse, when it comes to following the herd. If the group supports something questionable, most people won't speak up. They're too afraid of being labeled as difficult or judgmental. The root of this behavior is insecurity. People who are confident in themselves don't abandon their principles just to fit in. But those who doubt their worth are quick to trade their values for validation. It's a short-term solution to a long-term problem. They might feel accepted in the moment, but deep down, they know they've sold out. That guilt doesn't go away. It just hides under the surface, waiting to explode later. Endowment effect. The endowment effect is what happens when people get overly attached to their stuff and start thinking it's worth way more than it actually is. It starts the second they take ownership of something. Suddenly, whatever they own, no matter how average or downright useless, feels special. This begins with the psychology of ownership. People value things more when they belong to them. The second something becomes theirs, it stops being an object and starts being part of their identity. That attachment clouds their judgment and makes them overestimate its value. It's sentimental, but the brain eats it up. Rational people fall for this trap because emotions and logic don't play well together. When you own something, you feel connected to it, even if it's objectively junk. That emotional connection tricks you into thinking it's worth more than it is. Instead of seeing the thing for what it's actually worth, you see it as part of yourself. Letting go feels like losing a piece of who you are, so you hold on to it or refuse to sell unless someone offers a ridiculous price. Even then, there's a part of you that hesitates to sell it or something. The origins of this nonsense are evolutionary. Ownership gave early humans a survival advantage. If you owned tools, food, or shelter, you were more likely to live. Over time, the brain started associating ownership with value. That instinct is still wired into modern brains. But now it's making people hoard and overvalue things. It's hard to keep control of your rationality when the emotions want to surge out of every part of your body. It's almost inevitable as time. You're bound to experience one or more of these at least once in your life. The only question is, what will you do to not let it control you? Are you going to look like an Easter Island Moai? Or are you going to lash out when no one's around? These are not the only options. I don't want you having a false dichotomy over these two choices. Pick your path to get rid of the poison. See y'all.